have orchestral templates become outdated, or is there still a place for them in a modern composer's workflow? This is actually a topic of discussion that came up in a recent ThinkSpace Education technical rundown webinar, and as one of the tutors for their orchestral composition bootcamp, I find myself thinking about this pretty often. I'm someone who loves workflows. I'm someone who loves building systems. It's actually one of my strengths. When I took the Composer Strengths Explorer, which you can check out for yourself down in the description, but I also know how easy it is to overcomplicate things, and that can sometimes hold me back from actual composition. And I've actually wanted to do this for a while now, but today I would like to go through and just build a full orchestral template in Logic Pro, but specifically using Musio, mainly because I want to keep this template lightweight. I want it to be functional without getting too lost in complexity, and I want this to be something that I can easily load up whether I'm here or if I'm on the go and I'm using my laptop. I feel like over the years we've seen or heard about these just massive all-in-one orchestral templates, ones with hundreds to 1,000 tracks in them that can kind of cover any project that comes your way. I know that John Powell would show his annual Logic Pro template, and there's always a conversation about whether or not people should be using these massive templates. And of course, it's going to come down to how you specifically like to work, how you find creativity and inspiration, and of course, your resources. And I am starting to see this shift away from those huge templates. As somebody that loves structure and systems, it's going to be hard for me to let go of that. And I don't necessarily think I have to. And like I said, I do want to build a template that is lightweight, but can still handle a full orchestra. And so these are going to be the 3 reasons why I still use templates today. And so the first thing is going to be that the right template has a nice balance between structure and flexibility. It's important to remember that templates are meant to give you a starting point, not just a rigid setup. Since we're building an orchestral template, we want to start with a basic or some sort of core orchestra set in place already for us. This way it allows us to explore more specialized or impromptu instruments and tracks. The next reason why I use templates is because templates will usually allow me to manage my system resources more effectively. So resources. And this means you have to take your CPU and RAM usage into consideration. When I tried to make my very first orchestral template nearly 10 years ago, I didn't really understand that samples take up memory. Samples take up part of your RAM. When I would open up that template to start a new session, I would see every instrument load in one by one, and Logic would effectively crash with the project overload. Now in retrospect, it's such a simple, obvious solution, but when you're building your template, it's okay to then purge those samples so that they remain essentially blank until you load them in. And you're only loading in the samples that you use in that project. And so the second reason why I like using templates when I'm writing is because if I'm aware of my resource management while I'm building it, that usually leads to less technical problems in the long run. And so number 3 is going to be all about how using templates can really help you save time. A lot of composers that might just be starting out, or, they're finding their first couple of gigs, especially for these composers, you might land a project and then be expected to have a very quick turnaround time. Like we said before, building up your core orchestra. If you have that basic orchestra set up for you in the beginning, then you can build off of that. Instead of going in one by one and loading in your violins and then your violas and your celli and your basses, and then, making sure everything is routed the right way. And then you start thinking that it's easier to just throw on a ton of reverbs on different tracks because it's easier than trying to figure out routing. And then you go back to problem number 2 where your resources are getting depleted. So save yourself the time. The point of this template that we're going to build is to create something that is efficient with your resources, something that can save you time in the long run. You put in the work now so that it helps you out later. Now, before we dive into what the template's actually going to look like, I really want to clarify and always kind of keep in the back of my mind why I'm doing this in the first place. And the first reason is because, like I said, I want to make sure that I lean in the direction of simplicity, you know, not overcomplicating things like I tend to do, but I still want to feel like this is pretty in-depth. I still want this to be something that I can turn to regardless of the project, and then I can adjust accordingly. And that was a big factor into why I wanted to do something just with Musio instruments. And I should point out that this video is not sponsored by Musio in any way. They don't know I'm doing it. If you've seen other Musio content of mine, I just genuinely believe in the product. It's super easy to overspend, to get into libraries that are just overly complicated. And I feel like I can do everything that I really want, or a majority of everything that I want, with Musio instruments. And then if not, I can usually find a workaround. Now, this isn't a Musio promotion video, so I'm not gonna go through and like review and walk through the product. I have a ton of videos on that already if you wanna check that out, but I am a Musio affiliate. So if you do wanna give it a shot, I'll leave a link in the description down below. So the next thing I wanna keep in mind is that I will definitely be organizing this template in orchestral score order. So winds, brass, percussion, strings. And if you've seen some of my other videos, I am someone who loves articulation sets, although that might become a little bit too granular. So for the time being, I might not. You know what? I am going to do an articulation set, but there might be some sort of balance between using key switches and individual tracks. I think if anything, I might do a track for long notes and a track for short notes so that it's easier to balance later on. And then the third thing I want to keep in mind is that I think I want to have a section dedicated to sketching. I think the core template is going to be kind of like, you know, individual instruments, track by track kind of thing. But I do want to be able to have a space where if I just want to start writing and exploring, I don't have to write a violin line and then a cello line and a flute line. I want to be able to use ensemble patches for that quick approach to writing. But I don't think that's going to be something that's necessarily part of the workflow or the routing. It's been a very long time since I've built a new template from scratch, so I am a little bit nervous, and I'm looking at just like this blank screen. Let's go. This should be an easy process. It should be a simple process. So like I said, let's just start in orchestral order. So let's start off with like the winds. So if I were to just search Woodwinds, there's Woodwinds. That's actually good to know that this is in here now. Maybe just winds. And I know that they have Cinewinds Core, Cinewinds Pro, Low Winds, Hollywood Winds, but let's go to just Core. Start off with the basics. So if I were to take a look at the piccolo flute, let's go to the instrument. This is a key switch patch, so I do have access to my legatos, my sustains, tenuto, staccato, staccatissimo, and then the whole and half step trill. Let's just go legato, vibrato for this. I think I command click to unmap. Yeah, you know what? For this track alone, I might just want to do legato. Oh, in that case, you know what? I don't need, I'm going to get rid of you. I'm actually going to go to the individual articulation. Legato, yeah, let's just go for vibrato. Okay, so this is just that single patch. We'll say piccolo, legato. Because this is a multi-output Musio instrument, I'm gonna go down, and you can't actually see it, but I'm gonna go down, and that way you can see here, I've added, with the plus button, I've added some aux tracks. So let's just say that the first instrument is going to be my legato, the second is gonna be my longs, and the third is shorts. All right, so let me select you two. Let's add you to the workspace. Piccolo legato. We'll call you piccolo longs and piccolo shorts. This way, this is the main instrument, and I don't have to have multiple instances of Musio. Piccolo flute legato, that's great, and it is coming out of output 1 and 2. Then we'll go to piccolo flute key switch. This will be just my longs, but I don't necessarily want the legatos for this. Sustain, tenuto I don't want, staccato I don't want, staccatissimo I don't want, and my trills. And it automatically sets it out to 3 and 4. So if I were to go here, and then I'll do it again, but this will be just piccolo flute key switch, just the shorts. So theoretically, this is just legato. Then we have piccolo longs and piccolo shorts. And if I wanted to change it up, now I'm gonna do a new track. It can be Musio again. We're gonna go to Winds, Core, and this time we're gonna go for just a regular flute. All right, works for me. And then we'll load in the key switch patch again, and then we'll load in another one. And this one is going to be just the longs. Again, this is basically like what we did with the piccolo. And then this one is going to be just the shorts. We'll call you flute legato, flute longs, and flute shorts. Just to double check. And we're going to do this basically for every instrument. So this one, I think I want the oboes all in one, or at least in one instance. So you are going to be oboe 1 legato. That's going to be oboe 1 longs, oboe 1 shorts, oboe 2 legato, oboe 2 longs, oboe 2 shorts. And honestly, the reason why I am doing key switch patches is so that I don't have a million articulations. Even though I know that a lot of people do prefer individual tracks per articulation, I could essentially do something similar here where, you know, each one is going to a different stereo output. But because I just want it to stay simple and not too many tracks, I like to use key switches when available. Let me just see what's in low winds. We're not there yet, but okay, they're all ensemble patches and kind of like effects and stuff. Woodwinds, so I don't necessarily need to use it for what I'm doing right now. And I believe Pro is just like extra instruments, which we could include, but for this template, at least for this recording, I don't think I need to, although I might do it at some future point where I will include an alto flute, bass clarinet, bass flute, things like that. So let's move on over to the clarinet. We'll go to the clarinet legato. Part of me is kind of regretting that I'm doing legato vibrato, but I can always change that later. And then we'll go to clarinet key switch and then clarinet key switch again. We will use this track. We're gonna create the aux tracks, add them in. All right, and so that should be our clarinet. What's important to note is that the legato it is monophonic, so you're only gonna do one line at a time. Whereas if you're writing for multiple clarinets, you can go to, like, let's say your sustained non-vibrato, and you can write for 2 clarinets at once. Same with the shorts. Next up is instrument 5. And we'll just go to the bassoon legato, bassoon key switch, bassoon key switch. All right, and technically we have a full-ish wind section. And this is kind of the process we're gonna go throughout the entire orchestra. A special track for legato, a dedicated track for longs, a dedicated track for shorts. What I'm going to do now is create a group. And before I forget, because you never know what could happen, save as template whenever you can. It's going to go to project templates. You're going to see some of the old ones. Like I used to separate by main template, mixing template, that's not helpful, new main template. 2023, I did an originals orchestra template. This was the one, that's probably my most recent one. So I'll just call this Musio template, and then I can always change that later. One trick that I really like to do is actually to create just a completely blank track. Again, this is specific to Logic. It might be in other softwares as well. So if I were to create a brand new track, I could go to reassign track. I could go, and what you might find is something that says no output here. Because I already started messing around with this, it doesn't show up, but basically it's your blank track. Here you can use it as a divider. So I might have one here, I might duplicate, and then I might call this, I like 5 equal signs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, space, and clarinets, space, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I can duplicate you, bring you just below, and then I'll do all of this again. This way I can still visually see the difference between instruments. And then if I have any other type of instrument in that family, so bassoon, I could then have contrabassoon, and it goes under the bassoon category. Or if we look at flutes, we might want to include alto flute one day, and that goes under the flute category. And again, this all falls under my Woodwind summing stack. Now, because I am someone who is very particular, how about we change you to, I wish there were more Woodwind options. I guess that for now. Oh, and you can't change the color. No. Okay. Or at least these blank ones. I now that I think about it, I do remember. So let's once again go down to you. We will go to track color. And to me, woodwinds are always this color. And that is a simple woodwind setup. I need to be very particular about how I want to handle the brass here, because there are a million different brass libraries. And knowing me, I'm going to want everything. Oh man, I forgot that they do industry brass as well, and I love that sound. That's a more recent library that Cinesamples did within the past few years. I think I'll stick with Cinebrass for now. This is where I'm going to have to go in between, I think, Cinebrass Core and Cinebrass Pro, because unlike like Cinewinds, where core was just like your core instruments and pro was like your whistles and extended wind instruments, there's going to be a bit of a difference with the brass. All right, so I know that I'm going to have 2 horns, 6 horns. Okay, these are all my key switches, solo trumpets. This is where it gets a little hard because there are ensembles as well, which are useful. You could go for your 2-horn ensemble. You could double up for a 4-horn ensemble, 6-horn, but remember, keep this simple. I'm so used to getting so granular, and I just want to get granular, but it becomes too big if I do that. I don't know what I want to do. Maybe, because the thing with ensembles as well, when it says something like a 12-horn key switch patch, is that I want to think about when I'm writing split. I don't want to do something that's 12 horns and then I play a second note and it's an additional 12 horns. For example, if I were to do a 12-horn legato, but then I know I want to write 6 and 6, then I want to keep in mind I should have 6 horns and 6 horns. It's this math that can get very confusing. I think 6 horns is definitely a good place to start, and then I can divide from there. And if necessary, I could do a 12-horn ensemble. So let's start with a max of 6. Let's assume that we have access to 6 horns. But then there's a 4-horn ensemble. I'm going to have both. I'm going to start with 2 horns. There, I said it. I'm doing it. 2-horn, true legato. This is where it gets so confusing because I feel like I'm bouncing between pro and core. And I just want to make sure I cover all my bases. And again, this might be me overthinking it, but it makes me feel better knowing I did the math right. This way, if I were ever to write for a live ensemble, it's somewhat accurate. I love the way the Cinebrass horns, brass in general, that entire section sounds. I've always said this, but Cinebrass is my go-to. I feel like brass can be difficult to capture. This one I really like. 2-horn ensemble. Then let's go to our key switches and we'll do one more and we will do what we did with the winds. So this can be 2 horn legato, 2 horn longs, 2 horn shorts. Let's go to the instrument. We are going to get rid of, nope, not you. Well, if you're only sustain, then what am I doing a key switch for? You know what? Let's just get rid of both of you, because if it's only 1 short and 1 long, why am I doing a key switch? Sustain and staccatissimo. Honestly, I should maybe change the name to sustain and staccatissimo, but I want everything to match. So let's just double check that you work. Yep. And what we'll do is we will create a summing stack. We'll call you brass. I have my stream deck here in case anyone was looking, and this is how I control creating a new track, new project, save as, open movie, export movie, things like that. I've seen other people actually use their stream deck as a way to switch articulations, which is really cool. Normally, what I would use is my iPad, and I would actually use something called Touch OSC and kind of control and create my own buttons and faders, and I like that. I'm not really doing that with this template because that becomes a whole other thing. So create a new track. Let's go back to brass. Let's go to the horns. We did 2. I do want to do the 4 horns though. Oh, but they don't have legato for 4 horns, do they? Am I missing it? I don't think so. In that case, I'll just stick with 4 horn longs and 4 horn shorts. So here I'm just gonna do longs. So sustain, mute. Is growl? Is growl just long as well? Yes, it is. See, right there is 8 horns, and I don't want that. Rips. All right, so these 2 are going to be my shorts, and then I have my longs. We'll call this one 4 horn longs, 4 horn shorts. New track, Musio. Next, I would like to do probably 6 horns and then maybe solo, probably solo. So I'm going to do true legato as its own track. Then I'll go to 6 horn key switch twice. I want to double check pro. Nope, because then that's 12 and I don't necessarily want 12 right now. That feels more like a per project thing. So this is legato. This is going to be longs. Honestly, I should just do sustain at that point. 6 horn sustain, and then the key switch, but just for the shorts. I might do something like that. I might change the color to be... To me, horns are like this. Oh, why? No. They're all the same. That's why. They can't be the same color. Nuts. I wish I could change the color of each one, but they are technically a singular output. In that case, you are going to be known as =, horns. Still want it to be that. And I know it's going to change the color of everything else, but for now, that's not a problem. All right, now that I feel like I got my 2, 4, and 6 horns, I guess I should do solo as well. Horn solo, what do I have? Legato and sustain. That's not enough. Let's go to pro. So let's just stick with legato. What else do we have? Sustain. And then, there it is, solo horn, key switch. And that'll be for our shorts. That's legato, solo, horn, longs, even though it's just sustain, solo, horn, shorts. And I think I want this probably up above. I should have done that first, now that I'm thinking about it. Beautiful sound. This is just the long, so if we wanted to write for 2 horns, individual parts, that could be great for that. And shorts, you want your template to be as easy as possible for you to navigate. So that way I see split out my solos, my 2s, my 4s, my 6. Let's create a new track. I feel like I should just double check to see if there's anything else I want to add for horns, although descant horn, I don't necessarily need it though. This is always something I can come back to. Industry brass, do I want to even check? They have so many options though. What did I say? What did I say to myself? Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I can always go back later. I'm going to call it done for my horns. Next up is going to be trumpets. Let's go to core. Because I did want a solo horn, let's go to solo trumpet. I feel like that's only fair. But which one? Was there one in Pro? Trumpet solo has these few. You know what? I can probably figure out the difference if I just load them in. Whereas trumpet solo here. See, there's, okay, trumpet solo legato. A really, really beautiful, delicate sound. So, and I have a feeling the Pro one is a little bit harsher. So let's say I want both solos as different types of trumpets. Okay, so this is, I already have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have to do a total of 3 more. Yep. Yeah, so that has more of a brassy, harsher tone to that. Trumpet ensemble. I don't think it gives us a specific number in the ensemble, but my assumption is that it's 3, because 3 trumpets is pretty standard. Pro does it only has 2. I'll do both. Seems like I'll do a sustain, and then I'll do a key switch for the shorts. I should have been thinking about what I wanted my standard short to be, because I think it automatically sets to tenuto, but I don't want that to be my default. I kind of want staccato to be my default. That can be a later problem though. So those are my 2 trumpets, long and short. I just wish that the other one told me what it was. I think it is 3. I could be wrong, but I really do think it is 3. Yeah, it just says ensemble. And I vaguely remember trying to like see if on the website it said the number, and I don't remember if it did. So let me do true legato. Then I'll do just the key switch. Ooh, what would you be considered? Crescendo? You're not technically long. You're not a sustained note the way a sustain or a trill is, so you will be considered short. Therefore, I will just use a trumpet sustain patch, and the rest will be the key switch. And I'll get rid of legato, get rid of sustain, and everything else is good to go. And I'll add U, Control T. This could be wrong, but I'm going to stick with it anyway. 3 trumpet, legato, 3 trumpet, longs. If you are from Cinesamples, could you let me know if I got this wrong? And if so, how many trumpets are in this ensemble? Also, if you made it this long into the video, I congratulate you. I hope you're having a good time. So I got my solos, I got my 2s, I got my 3s, and I feel like that's pretty good. I don't think we usually will go above 3 trumpets. I do want to duplicate there, and we'll bring these in, and we'll bring this back up. There's a lot of like the tedious stuff that is annoying with templates, but it does help. I know we said we'll keep it simple, and I feel like we have. Woodwinds, just our general flutes, our general oboes, general oboe, clarinets, bassoons, horns, trumpets. You know, we're making moves, and I like that about us. The question is, what's next? Trombone, obviously. Here's the thing. Do I want cimbasso and bass trombone? The trombone ensemble. So in my let's talk. In my typical orchestral setup, or at least like how I've always viewed a brass setup, is 2 trombones, 1 bass trombone, and that is the trombone ensemble. Here, I'm not 100% sure. Trombone ensemble. Is that 3 trombones, but not including the bass trombone? Because I see a bass trombone here, but then that has the cimbasso with it, or a bass trombone with the tuba. And that's core. Let's go to pro. I got trombone ensemble again, and solo trombone. I think I'm gonna have to flub things. I'm gonna have to flub it. Let's start off with solos in pro. What's the growl like? So we'll say that this is our long, and then we'll do another key switch, and this is our shorts. Also, if you don't have a way to purge, just because we're talking about it, in general, Musio is super, super lightweight. It's crazy how much you can actually fit. And I also have other applications running in the background. If you can't, you can always turn off the track. Let me see if that's on off, and you can always just turn off an entire group, turn it back on. That way when it loads up, you don't have to load in every single instrument. So we said trombone ensemble. What do you sound like? Let us keep it going. Let's go back to core. Trombone ensemble, and we'll start adding in that as well. We'll do true legato. We'll do the key switch. Ooh, that sounds more. All right, so these are definitely more muted. That's good to know. And I think I want to do, we're going to do cimbasso, sustain, cimbasso staccato. Then we'll do sustain and then key switch. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, because you are just the sustain, you are just the staccato, you are just the sustain, and you are the key switch. Next up, let's just go to tuba solo. And I do think I want it to be here. Tuba solo, we have legato, so we'll do that. We have sustain, so we'll do that. And then we'll do key switch. And then we'll just say ensembles. That's low chord, high. All right, so I'll say 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's what's hard. They're all kind of different, aren't they? I feel like because this is something I'll rarely, or not rarely, but it's not as common, I can just keep it as a key switch. Yeah, I'm not gonna sweat it too much. And let's say brass ensemble effects, maybe? So I have my longs, my shorts, and my effects. I wanna say that's all of our brass, right? The only other thing that I would potentially lean towards, especially depending on the music, would be something like this. So maybe I will do like a low brass type thing. And I think low brass is pretty common. I'll just do sustain and key switch. I think what I'll do is get rid of this. Let's go back. I'm going to add in staccato, specifically as shorts, And then I'll do the key switch again, but get rid of sustain and staccato because these all feel more like effects. Other than that, what's next, right? Our percussion, it's going to be a little different where it's going to be more based on type, I guess, right? Maybe our metals, maybe different types of drums. And then what do we have? Our strings. And that's going to be, I guess that will be a pretty large section as well, but not really because we'll have maybe a section for solo instruments and then a section for ensemble. Next up is the fun one. And by fun, I mean the most unconventional. How do I want to do this? You know what? Maybe I will do it the way they have it split up. Musio has just like a ton of different libraries. I don't necessarily want to create like a template that has everything in here, especially with things changing. Libraries are being added. I like the idea of Musio being the hub. I just want to have a core that I can load everything into. Okay, I kind of know what I want to do. And like pianos, you know, and like the organ and dulcimer, handbells, like these are great, but I don't know if I want like that big of a template. Colors, oh man, there's a ton of percussive stuff that's great. All right, don't get too bogged down. It's okay. Simplify. I have to remind myself all the time. Oh man, I forgot how many good instruments there are. All right, if I were just to look up perc, auxiliary, epic, metal, orchestral, tonal, wood, and world drum kit. Maybe let's start with orchestral and let's just do a timpani. I do wish there was like a timpani key switch. I feel like that would have been nice. This is where it gets a little difficult. What if I did a new articulation set? This is where things get a little nerdy. I just really like articulation sets and I don't necessarily want all of these there, but there's no key switch patch. I think I want everything in one. So I might not do this for every instrument, but just so you can see kind of how I did this. And there's another video that I did specifically about creating custom key switches within Musio. So if you haven't seen that, that would be a great one to check out. What I'm gonna do is call you hit soft. Actually, how many are there? There's 7. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hits medium, hits hard. Roll soft, roll medium, roll hard, and then effects. So then we want to do note type on as if we're triggering a key switch. So every time it goes on, the channel, we want everything in the output to be 1 and 2. Because we're only going to be using one track, just like a key switch track would be. So everything's 1, 2. I messed this up. I guess technically everything should be, 4, 5, 6, 7. Selector. I guess we can do, if the lowest is C1, let's just stick with like a really low -1. And then it will increase incrementally, or chromatically, I should say, which is really nice. That way it doesn't interfere with any of our notes. We want MIDI remote on, and let's just make sure we add in. There we go. There we go. I just had to go an octave down. I go to D. That's our hard mallet. D sharp. Soft, medium, nice. All right. What this essentially does, and I won't do it for every track. I think what I'll just do is be more carefree. But I wanted to show that like you can create these key switches by loading in the articulations that you want, making sure they come out of a single output. And again, this is if it doesn't have a key switch patch, and then using articulation sets to your advantage. So I could save this as, I'm going to say new Musio, and I'll just call this like timpani. This way I have an entire timpani track at my disposal. A new Musio track. What I might do is just do like a concert snare drum. If at any point I want to add in more, I can just add in more articulations and create more aux tracks that way. Or if you want to get a little bit more granular, you could do what we just did and create articulation sets to create these like custom key switches. But for now, I feel comfortable with just a snare drum that's the concert snare. What else? Orchestral bass drum, same thing. So maybe what I'll do is then create another one. This will be bass drum. So I have a bass drum, and if I want, I can always add in another. I'll do toms. concert toms, we'll load you in. And then I'll do definitely suspended cymbals. And I kind of want to do the piatti as well in this. And this will kind of do like what we did with our instruments. So I'll add an aux track, I'll add that, and this can be piatti. Yeah. And then we'll do the gong. And we'll call this gongs plus tam. And what we'll do is we're going to create a summing stack. This is going to be our percussion. What we'll do is we'll call this orchestral, and then we'll do this again, and maybe this will be our epic. I'll say epic. This will just be big ensemble. I feel comfortable with that. I might do monster low hits. I might do monster swooshes. And what I might do, maybe I'll add taikos. For now, let that be it. And I know that I have all these, but I can always add them later on. The reason why I'm doing it this way is because I want to be able to control each one of these epic percussion instances on their own track. Like, I don't want to treat taikos the same way I might treat the big ensemble. So that's why I have to make sure I'm thinking about this correctly. So hybrid, monster low hits, monster swooshes, taikos. If I ever want to then add more, click the plus sign, add it to the track. Just remember that this is up to 16 within a single instance of Musio, but you can always create a new instance and continue, or separate it out by big ensemble, and maybe that has 4. Maybe your hybrid is its own thing. And what I'll do is call this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 space epic. And if there is maybe like drums of war, then maybe I will create a new instance, and that can be its own set of stuff. I don't know what I want it to be next. Maybe like metals or something. I definitely want bowed. I think I want scraped. Definitely triangle, mark tree. A lot of these are actually really good. Tambourine is pretty common. I'll stick with that for now, and if I want to add to it, I always can. So for now, let's call you metals. Let's keep it moving. I could do tonal. That would be a good one next. Tonal, and then maybe wood. Auxiliary, I don't even think I need to do that for this one. Like, I can always add that later, but it would follow this similar setup. I could go the timpani route where I create kind of like key switches, or, you know, for xylophone, for vibraphone, for marimba. So I'll do these 4 as one thing. Yeah, load, 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 load. And then I might do something again, and this will just be xylophone. So 1, 2, 1, 2. You know what? I know myself. It's not that it's harder. I just don't want that big of a template. That's what it is. So you know what? I am going to do an articulation set. It takes a little bit more time, but I'm going to be happy I did it. And it's nice that everything is in the same range. So I might just do like a C1 or something. I want everything to come out of one track. We're going to call this xylophone. I'm going to go over to articulation set over here. I'm going to create a new one. We have a total of 4 articulations. I'll go to output. I'll go to note on, channel 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll just stick with C1, C sharp, D, D sharp. Go to make sure MIDI remote is on. We'll add them over here, and let's hope for the best, right? There we go. It works. Awesome. And then I'm going to do something similar, a new track. Honestly, what I should do is just have a track that is kind of preset. So maybe like I'll have this up top, and I'm going to call this new instrument duplicate, and I'm going to keep that turned off. And the reason why I'm going to do this is that instead of loading in like a new track, I could just duplicate this. I'll bring it down wherever I want. The whole point is it's all routed where it needs to go, and it's all within Percussion. And then I can just kind of move this wherever I want. So let's turn this on. Let's go to Musio. Where was I? I don't even know. Tonal. I'll go to vibraphone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wow. And we'll kind of do what we did before. Yeah, this makes me feel a lot better just having it all in one place. And then I think I'll just do marimba and then I'll move on from tonal. So what I might do is duplicate. I'll go here. I'll load up Musio, turn that on, go to perc. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I guess I'll include the glass marimba as well. Nice. And something that you should note about articulation sets is now you'll notice only when there is a set available. The articulation you can choose up top here. You can also go to the actual piano roll, and let's see if I can drag this up. If I were to put in a note, you can also choose the articulation here and adjust it as well. That can really come in handy, especially if you don't want to necessarily remember the key switch. You can always change it from the drop-down menu. And then I'll just do one more tonal because I feel the need to. What did I say it was? Tubular bells, that's what it was. Okay, and this one I think we can just do an aux track. All right, easy enough. And what I'm going to do is turn off everything. And then next up will be, let's just stick with wood for now. And then I might just do like a couple of these, maybe like these 4, and then I can always add if necessary. So first we'll call this woods. Yeah, and honestly, I feel comfortable with that. And I feel like that's a pretty safe percussion section. If I were to just browse, right, and see what else we have. Yeah, there's a drum kit, which could come in handy. African marimba. So like, for example, I might add this African marimba to maybe around here. I might use a divider and create like a marimba section. That's, I guess, to taste. I could do more like collision impact. So like epic stuff, I could create and add collision impact here. I might create a space and then just do something that's like collision impact designer. Like I said, I feel pretty comfortable. Now, technically, I could go in and do vocals and like choir and stuff, but I don't think that's necessary at the moment. I feel like harp is pretty important and piano. All right, so let's just do a brand new instrument. Let's focus on keys. I don't think I'm gonna do like textured or colors. I might just do like Cinepiano. I'm gonna load. Oh, these are, almost 2 gigs. I feel like I should move. I think I'm loading all this onto my computer, which I don't want to do. I actually should be saving all this to my SSD, but I didn't think about that. And we're not doing articulations, so I think with this, I'm going to do just aux tracks instead of like the articulation sets. So I'll load you up. Nice. Then I'll add in cinematic. What was next? Classical. Oh, it went in order. Yeah, so. Classical. And rock. And those will be my 4 main pianos. Create a summing stack, and we'll call this keys. And this could be where pianos, this could be other key related instruments. If I, harpsichord, organ, things like that. I won't add that in this template right now because that's very specific, but at least I have my 4 main pianos. And then if I want to one day go and add in like piano in blue, I can create a little divider and create a new instrument that's specifically piano in blue. But for now, I feel like this is pretty solid. I think what I'm gonna do is just focus on Cineharps. Oh yeah, this is absolutely gonna be a key switch. I might have the 3 harps as individual tracks, including aux tracks, and then I might have glissando as another track. Oh, wow, this is crazy. There's so much. For the time being, we're doing harp 1, harp 2, and harp 3. And then we're doing gliss and then effects. Oh yeah, look at this. This only has, I guess, an octave worth of articulations or of glissandi. So you would have to include others. Is there an easier way to go about this? The easiest way is to not worry about it and to set that up when you get to it. That's the answer. Yeah, so I feel comfortable with just this. Let me just double check everything works. Honestly, because there's so many for the glissandi, I could turn this into an articulation set because going up the octave up here, it's not terrible. This would be a great option for articulation sets, but this is definitely a bit too much for me right now. And same with effects. You could do something, create a set for the effects as well. Next up, I think I'm just gonna go right into strings. Choirs is something that like I could add in, but I don't find it too necessary at the moment. Okay, so I'm editing the video right now and I do kind of wish I added that choir. So maybe at some point in the future, I will add in a choir. So let's just start with strings. So let's go Cinestrings Core. This might be one of those situations where I honestly might not touch Cinestrings Pro because these are definitely articulations that are a little bit less common. I feel like I can save Cinestrings Pro for the future. So if I were just to stick with core and maybe solo, that would be a good start. You know what? Let me actually just stick with solo first. I don't want to overthink this. So violin 1 legato, and this is solo. Yeah, stick with that. Then we'll do violin 1 key switch, and then we'll do violin 1 key switch again for shorts. I'm going to remove performance. I'm going to remove bow change, although that's good to know that I have it. Same with espressivo. So I'll just keep this as sustain, sustain, sustain. I'll remove marcato, staccato, spiccato, pits, and I'll keep tremolo. So this one will get rid of you, marcato, staccato, spiccato, short, pits, and then we'll get rid of tremolo. And I feel like oh, I should say solo violin. I'm going to create summing, say strings. I believe the chamber ensemble is just a combination, like an ensemble patch of all of these solos. So I don't necessarily feel like I want to do that, but we'll definitely go to violin 2 next. We'll say legato, then we'll do key switch, key switch. If this is long, I don't feel a need for another legato. So that's something that's different. So instead of the Bartok pits, I just replaced it with tremolo. That way it's the same setup as the violin 1. That's infinite and then B. Nice. Okay, let's do viola legato. Then we'll do viola key switch, key switch. I could have done this in instrument order as well, so like solo violin and then violin ensemble, but I kind of like this setup as well because it also allows me to think in terms of like chamber, or at least like quartet or quintet. I think you could go either way. Let's go cello legato, and then we'll do cello key switch, cello key switch, and then we will add the 2. And then we'll do bass. Legato, and then we'll go up to key switch, and then we will add the 2 tracks. Okay, so let's go to legato just to hear All right, and then let's get rid of these. Sustain, sustain, marcato. Okay, and this doesn't have tremolo, and these are all shorts. So those are our solo instruments. Let us change our strings. To me, strings are like a purple. So let's do something like that. What I'll do then is take this, let's bring it down. This can then be actual ensembles. So let's say this is violin 1. For now, let's just go directly to our orchestral core. This is a full orchestral string library recorded at MGM scoring stage. How do I want to do this? Basically the way we did it for solos, but I think I want to do legato espressivo. I feel like that's... You know what I could do, especially for this? I'm going to do 3 versions of key switches because I feel like strings are so crucial to the orchestra, and I really want to make sure I have access to the different legatos. The longs could be the different sustains, and then the shorts. So I'm not going to do Cinestrings Pro now, but I will leave space for Cinestrings Pro. I don't think I'll do it now again because this is going to take up way too much time, but this would be an example of when I would absolutely use articulation sets. There's so many options to choose from that it's going to be totally overwhelming if I don't have an articulation set, but I don't need to do that now. But you would apply the same principle to this. Let's remove everything. So it's just these 3, and we'll say that these are violin 1 legato, add these 2 violin 1 longs, violin 1 shorts, surprise, surprise. For this one, we'll get rid of you, and you. We'll get rid of you, and Colenio. Bartok, harmonics we can add in. So let's maybe have harmonics be next. Then we can do tremolo. And honestly, I might change this around at some point in the future, but I just want to have something set. So... those are the longs. Then we have the shorts. I do want violin to... What did I do? Oh, I did 3 key switches. Okay. 1, 2, 3. I'll create those tracks. All right. So that is basically what we did for the violin 1s. And then let's go on to the violas. 2, 3, 4, 5. Violas. All right. Let's move on to cellos, or celli. And then let's move on to the basses. I actually think that might be all the strings. All right, let's just make sure we name everything correctly. You know what I might want to do now? I think just to get it over with, I think I will do some ensemble writing. I think symphony is probably the way to go. This seems promising. So if I were to do woodwind, brass, orchestral, and strings. And with this, I'm honestly not too worried. Actually, do I have more? Okay, just spiccato and pizzicato. Yeah, so you're not going to get anywhere near the depth, but at least you can write out longs and shorts. And I'm not going to get too crazy about splitting out longs and shorts because honestly, I'm probably not going to write officially with these ensemble patches. So I'm just going to kind of have one per section of the orchestra. So let's call you wind ensemble, brass ensemble, orchestral perc ensemble, and string ensemble. And this could be its own group in itself, and we'll call you sketching, and we'll turn them all off. Yeah, so I feel like you could do an entire section dedicated to choirs, an entire section dedicated to guitars, an entire section dedicated to synths, and then you would go in and kind of see what you need. Maybe under synth, you make up subcategories for your leads. Maybe you have your basses. Maybe you have kind of like pads or atmospheric synths. You know what? While I'm here, let me include this up here. And this will be new instrument, duplicate. This way, this is specifically routed already to the winds. Let's do, I forgot what color we said, probably something like that. Awesome. We have our winds, we have our brass, we have our percussion, and we have our strings. What is this? I guess 200 tracks. Oh man, I said this would be simple, but I also wanted this to be very functional. And this to me feels like a great place because I feel like I have access to everything that I absolutely need, but I can always create further. I want to now focus on reverb. So before we go into reverb, I actually want to clear up something that I messed up some of the routing, but I went ahead and fixed it. So I want to make sure that we spend some time now clarifying exactly how these groups work. And in turn, that's going to help us understand the reverb a little bit better. Let's say you come up with all of your grouped tracks, right? In Logic, we've been using summing stacks as opposed to just the folders because summing stacks still allow for groups that enable routing, whereas folder tracks are pretty much just blank tracks, but all of our instruments are housed in a group. So I actually went and fixed up some of these buses and inputs and outputs before I had just 2 extra tracks that kind of off-put the actual buses I wanted to use. But essentially, if we were to look at our winds group in our mixer, it is a summing stack track, so it's an auxiliary track. Basically, the input is bus 1, and if you notice, all of the instruments in the winds all have an output of bus 1. So that means that all of these tracks are going to be routed into this single winds track. And then you'll see that we have the output of the winds track go to stereo out. This is something that we're going to change later on. For now, it's that simple. And then if we were to look at the brass, that's the next group. So it makes sense that we use bus 2. What that means is all of our brass instruments have Musio as that input or whatever library you have as that input. The output is going to be the bus that routes to your group. So in this case, bus 2 is going to route from the output to the input of this one track, and it's going to continue in that pattern. You can continue on and on. Right now, we only have these 6 plus 7 is our sketching. You don't have to go crazy about going in order, and realistically, it's not that big of a deal. You can also always change the names of your buses in settings if you really care about numbers being out of order. As long as you understand the way the routing works, now we can talk about reverb and how that works as well. So I went ahead and created a sample reverb for our winds, and then we'll kind of walk through how we did that. I basically created 2 reverb tracks that are specifically for winds. One of them is going to be our short reverb for the winds, and the other is going to be our long reverb for the winds. I created a track, an aux track, that has a relatively short reverb. For me personally, I just use spaces from east-west. You can also use whatever reverb you'd like, but then you can also take a look, and then I have a longer reverb, again, spaces too. I personally just don't like to overthink reverb that much. I think it's easy to overcomplicate it. I feel like this is the best option that gives me enough control over reverb on specific tracks without getting way too specific. So you'll see that for this short wind track, I just decided the input was going to be a bus. The way I decide a lot of my groupings is you'll see that Logic, for example, will group in groups of 32. So 33 to 64 is another group of 32, 65 to 96, another group. and it kind of goes up until 256. This allows me some space. So winds is bus 1, brass is bus 2, percussion 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, which we've already seen. I didn't want to take away 8 or 9 in case I do want a choir group or a guitar group or whatever it may be. So I decided that 65 is going to be where that short reverb track is going to be routed to, and then 66 is going to be specifically for that long reverb. As we move forward, so with brass, it'll likely be 67, 68, percussion will likely be 69, 70, and so on. Similar to the way we grouped our instruments to a single section track, we're going to have our short and long reverb, their outputs be routed to the input of our summing stack track. So these two outputs, 33, are going to be the input of our track. Notice how I skipped over before. I went from, this is 1 through 32, and then I skipped over and did 65 because 33 through 64 I'll allow to be the groups. Here you'll see that we have short and long go into the wind reverb here. So if we wanted to do this again from scratch, let's say we have these two new auxiliary tracks. And again, you can create a new aux track by going to Option, Create New Auxiliary Channel Strip. Here we did 65, 66. So let's go on to 67, 68. So if you're on a Mac and you're using Logic, one of the shortcuts to make this go incrementally, so you don't have to do it one after another, is to hold down the Option or the Alt and click, go to bus, we want to continue. Before we did 65, 66, so we'll do 67 and 68 should automatically appear. So we have our two tracks. Let us copy you over here, and then we'll copy you over here. We're using the same short and long space. So we'll say short and long, but what we're going to do is create a new summing track or summing stack. And just like I have it with the wind verb, we're now going to call this brass verb. And now what I want to do is change the input. It automatically assigned it the next available bus, but I want to keep this open. So we're going to take a look at 33 through 64. We already know that we use bus 33 for the winds, so we'll go on to bus 34 for the brass, and then I'll make sure that we change our outputs to bus 34, brass verb. And just as a side note, the way we're using reverb is as a send, so it's okay to make the reverb very wet. We're going to have control over how much reverb we want to send. And what's nice about this method is that we don't have to load on a reverb on every single track. We only have dedicated reverbs. Honestly, you don't even have to do a short and a long if you don't want to, but it is nice to have two different types of reverbs. For example, we take a look at the winds because it already created some sends. I already preset this so that one send is going to bus 65, and we already know that bus 65 is our short reverb. And then we have another send that is bus 66, and that is our long reverb. And again, you have the option of renaming your buses. I believe you can do that through like the in-out settings in Logic, and you can control exactly how much you would like to send. And what's great about this, and the reason why it was turned off initially, is on this duplicate track. So this track, new instrument duplicate, it's already pre-routed. It's automatically going to have the sends turned off. That way it's not automatically getting extra reverb that you don't want. And then when you do want to play with reverb, you can just turn it on and adjust accordingly. So let's just take a listen to like the flute or something, flute legato. So let's take a listen to the short reverb. You only want a little bit too. Reverb, you don't want to overdo it. Then you can also mess with the longer reverb. Let's reduce it to around -20. I like using this send method versus just on the track itself because it's resource efficient and you have more control over how much you want to send. But if you don't want the reverb or you just want the dry signal, or at least the signal that comes as a default, now if we take a listen again, we won't have any reverb that we are sending to. Instead, we're just getting that recording stage sound. Now that we have the winds basically set up already, let's take a look at the brass. So we know it's 67, 68. I'm going to basically select everything brass. I'm going to have the send go to bus 67, right? So this is our short. And then I'll have another send go to 68 for long. All right, so those are set up. And actually, let me just double check that I did that correctly. So what are you? You're the 2-horn legato. Let's have you turned on and let's just bump you up just a touch. Yeah, I like to kind of keep it subtle. So we know it works. Let us get rid of that, or at least close that. We'll close up the brass verb, and then we'll do this again. So let us create a new aux track, and let's do one more. Let us remove the inputs. Let's make sure that the volume is at 0. Because these are the individual tracks, we want to go into the 60s, which is just what we have set up here. And again, we want to make sure, if you want to make this easier, just hold down the option button and it'll go incrementally. So 69 and 70. What we can do is we'll take the short, bring it over to the short track over here, and then we will take the long and bring it over to the longs. Now I feel like we can close that track or that group. We'll select both tracks. We'll add them to our window. This can be short, this can be long. We will create a summing stack, and now this can be our perk verb. Yeah, so if this was 33, if this was 34, so we'll just change you to 35, and then we'll change these two so that the output is 35. And now if I were to go to percussion, if I were to select everything inside the percussion, we're going to do what we did before where we send. So it should be 69 and bus 70. And then what we'll do is we will turn it all off, and that should be our percussion. We're just going to follow that exact same pattern through the rest of our orchestra. If you include choirs or guitars, just keep going in that pattern. So I went ahead and just followed that pattern for the rest of our reverbs. And so you'll see we have a group up here that's basically our winds, brass, percussion, keys, harps, and strings. That is going to give us our groups. So bus 33 is the input, 34, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, in general, when it comes to balancing a template, this is something that can be difficult to get right, especially when you're using different libraries, not just Musio, for example. Everything is just mixed and balanced in different ways. You might have a different size orchestra, you might be in a different space, solo instruments might sound different than ensemble instruments. Now, this video isn't specifically about balancing a template. Maybe that could be a future video, but I do want to give you a quick tip that you can have in place when considering balancing your template. So let's take a look at our instruments again. The first thing we want to do, instead of balance, we want to give it a stereo pan. This is because a stereo pan does a better job at actually panning an instrument left or right, whereas the knob before, you're kind of reducing the volume on one side and it's not actually panning the instrument. So stereo pan is the closest thing that we can get to realistically panning the instrument. Again, we'll make sure that this is applied to our blank track as well. This way, whenever we duplicate this track, it's going to have all these settings. One thing you might want to consider is applying an EQ depending on the instrument, but also it might be a good idea to include a gain. If I were to take a look, right now it says no plugin under audio effects. So if I were to go to utility, you'll see that I have a gain option. And this is a great way to control the volume of each instrument individually without having to touch automation, without having to touch a fader. This gives you the opportunity to balance without necessarily doing anything else to the instrument. And I love this. So instead of messing working with volume itself, the fader itself, I don't like to mess with that too much because of automation. I like everything to be as consistent as possible. So what I'll do instead is I'll apply this gain, and it actually allows me to get very specific on how much I would like to reduce or increase. If you take a look at the fader, you'll notice that it's very difficult to control that. And the farther down you go, the closer those numbers and tighter those numbers actually get. I have way less control down here. I could, of course, if I wanted like -30, I could, I guess, technically say that. But again, I would rather have everything kind of be consistent, and then I can control and make it a touch louder. Adding a gain like this, you know what? I wonder if I can do that. Oh, I can't. Okay, so I just have to do it individually. Or what am I doing? I could just go to utility, gain, and there we go. Okay, this way, when it does come time to balance the template itself, I can go into the gain and adjust from there. Also, if you want to quickly turn off the instrument so it doesn't take up that much of your resources, and if you're not using it, you can turn on and off your group on, and you see that it becomes like a fuller color, and then you could turn it off, and then you'll see everything grays out. This way, if you're working with a library or plugins that don't necessarily have a purge feature, you can technically remove it from your RAM. That was our winds. Let's move on to our brass. Again, what are we going to do? We are going to pan everything, or at least set it up so that it's ready to be panned. Right click, stereo pan, and we will add a gain. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn on and then off, and it should gray out all of our plugins. Once you decide to get a little bit more granular and you're actually focusing on each section as a whole, this is when you might pan right, left, depending on where you are sitting and where each section sits in an orchestra. That's super important. Usually, Musio is pretty good with this, and other sample libraries will do this. Libraries will come pre-panned, which is basically giving you the recording of where that instrument, that section was sitting in the orchestra. Sometimes you might want to just push it just a little bit farther. So if it's already coming out of your right ear, maybe just do it a touch more. This way you can carve out a little bit more space and it doesn't sound too muddy. It doesn't sound in the middle. So that was our brass. Let's go to percussion. We're kind of approaching the end of this template, and what you're going to want to do is actually what I might want to do is I'm going to select all my reverbs and I'm going to create a new track stack, and I want it to be a folder stack this time. So I'll take those reverbs, I'll create a folder stack, and I'm just going to call this reverb. That way I have just one location for all of my reverbs. And I wonder if there's an icon. This is by far the most important thing I could be doing right now. What's like a good reverb icon? Something like this. And now the last thing that we're going to do is create stem tracks. So if you ever need to bounce out individual sections, then you can actually use these tracks as a way to hand off the audio to whoever might need it. So what we're going to do is new audio track, and we're going to do as many audio tracks as there are groups, not including sketching. We're going to do one for winds, brass, percussion, keys, harps, and strings. So that's going to be a total of 6. We're going to want to make sure that instead of mono, we want it to be stereo. We're going to have the output still be stereo out. But remember how before when we said that the output was stereo out for the different sections, and then we said stereo out for the reverb, and then we'll get back to that. This is that point where we're now going to change that. So if we were to go to stereo out of all of our groups, we go to the bus, we already know that 33 through 64 was our individual reverbs. We know that 65 through 96 was our reverb groups. I want to give myself as much space as possible. So I'm going to go to the bottom group, the 225 to 256. And I'm going to say, let's start with 225. So now you'll see that the output of the winds is going to go to 225. Brass is 226, 227 for percussion, 228, 229, and 230. Then we're going to go to the reverbs, and we want to make sure that the reverb for a specific group matches the group that it's associated with. So if we were to look at the winds, we want to make sure that winds is going to go to 225. 225, and so on. And I'm going to go to stereo out, bus, and we'll go to 225, and it goes in order from 225 up to 230. And now if we want to be able to hear what's coming out of our audio tracks, let's say I want one as my full mix, right? Now I'm in the way over here. Okay, let me move me. At the very end, let's move the input. Let's change that to bus, and we're gonna put it all the way at the end, and we're gonna make it 256, but it's at the very corner. Bus 256 is gonna be our final bus for our final track, and then we'll work our way back. So bus 256 is the input, output is stereo out. Let's call this something like full through, change you to 0. And now what we want to do is create 6 more aux tracks to match our group number. This way we can route everything so that we can actually hear what's going on. We're going to have the inputs be the same as they were 226 to 230, or should I say 225 to 230, but we want the stereo outs 256, that last final track. So all of these aux tracks are going to our full through output. Create you and create track. There we go. What I'm going to do now is bump this down, and what I'll do is call this wins. This way we can at least hear everything without relying on just the audio tracks as kind of routing. These, honestly, we don't really ever have to touch them. We could just call them something like through tracks. And let's see exactly what's going on here. So let's say we have an instrument and it's our violin. We know that it's coming out through the string group. That string group gets routed to our bus, which will go into the audio track. It will also go into the through track so that we can still hear it. That through track is going to go through our full track, and then the full track will go out to the stereo output, which is why we can hear it. The reason why we go through this extra step at the end here with audio tracks and through tracks, one, instead of just leaving it so that the stereo out is on the groups, the audio tracks allow us to create those stems. And we want to make sure that we're still allowing ourselves to hear what's actually happening. And then if I were to record now, what I might want to do is say, let us do a recording of that part. And now what we have is a recorded string stem. So all of the strings, that was just violin. You could do full ensemble, and it'll all come out as a single string audio track. Now, what you might also notice is that once you go back to play, you might have to mute one or the other because it'll be playing the sample as well as the audio track so that you don't double up your sound. You can mute just whichever one you're not using. I realize I was in the way once again. So basically what we have is our sample, the MIDI that we write, that gets recorded as an audio track. Once you are done recording, you mute probably the audio, or if you're done writing, you can turn off your MIDI, and then you're just working with the audio track. And then what you can do from there is you can actually bounce. Let's say you want to bounce these few measures. You can then press Command B and you start from measure 2 and you end at measure 7 or whatever. It could be a WAV file, it could be MP3. You could bounce as an entire section. So if you have like winds, brass, percussion, whatever, you can set the cycle to however long you need, bounce it out, and becomes one file. Or you can export every audio file. So here it says one region as audio file. You can adjust any elements, adjust the format, and it will be called stem strings 1 or whatever it may be. And this way, now you have not only your single file as a full track, but you also have the individual sections. This way you can adjust sections individually. And then let's say the person that you send it out to says, can you remove the reverb? You can go back, turn off the reverb, reprint it, and you won't have any reverb. I know that this is definitely one of my longest videos I've ever done, but this is a masterclass in building a solid working template. Also one that is still open enough for you over time. I feel very good about this template. I feel like I've covered some major parts of the orchestra. Looking back, it does feel a bit big. It does feel like there were some parts where I fell back into my own ways of like, what if I need this? I am gonna do an articulation set. And that's just gonna come with practice, I think. Putting this together, I do feel like I actually was able to restrain myself a little bit. If I were to go back to my big decisions while making this template, I wanted to keep it fairly simple yet functional. And I feel like I did that. This just covers the core orchestra. I feel like I also gave myself some space to expand over time, especially with those new instrument duplicate tracks. I wanted to address my tendency to overcomplicate or hyper optimize. I do think my systems oriented self got slightly carried away with hyper optimization, but I still feel good about it. I still feel like I overcame that. In terms of track organization, articulation tracks and whatnot, I did some tracks that were articulation sets. I did some that used the instrument track as well as aux tracks. And I feel like I did actually a really good job with limiting to just like legato, longs, and shorts. I feel like that was very consistent throughout. I give myself a thumbs up there. And then the other thing was I wanted to give myself some space for sketching, strings, winds, brass, percussion. I was able to use ensemble patches that's outside of my core template. That way I can still turn to this when I am feeling somewhat creative, but don't want to get bogged down with the details. I have a place to explore. And the only other thing I wanted to make sure I did was I wanted to do this all with Musio, which again, this was all Musio other than the reverbs, which were east-west. I have been wanting to create or recreate my own template for a very long time. And this, believe it or not, is a stripped down version of what I had before. So I feel like this is a good starting point. And if you do want to try out Musio for yourself, you can always check out my affiliate link in the description down below. And if you want to learn more and just kind of get a walkthrough of Musio, then you should definitely check out some of my other videos next. All right, I'll see you over there. And as always, happy composing.